Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask Brother Stevenson a question, but wait, do you watch yourself? I mean, do you watch your films, or are you the kind of like, I did it, I don't really want to see it?
I did it and I don't really want to see it. Only because, like, I guess I'm so involved in the entire process, through the edits, through posts and stuff like that, that I've seen it and I've picked it apart, really trying to look at it, taking myself out of the situation as a producer, trying to look at the movie, how does it work? That watching it, sometimes it just, it's not for me anymore, it's for everybody else. Like, I did it, I lived it, it's for everybody else to kind of.
But every now and again you go like, damn, I killed that.
I have my moments. Only every once in a while, I'll do that.
Because you're extraordinary, brother.
Thank you, man.
And he's extraordinary. And to capture the sweetness of this man, if I may say so, right? There's a sweetness about his spirit in the midst of all of that trauma and turmoil that he consistently confronts. And one of the things that's interesting in this movie is how it represents ordinary black people and the religious and spiritual kind of messages that they both receive and give. Talk to us a bit about that.
Well, I do think we haven't really allowed the humanity of people who are arrested and convicted and condemned and their families to be understood. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason why I wrote the book, because I wanted people to understand these are human beings who love, who have mothers and daughters and sisters and brothers. They're not just statistics. They're not just numbers. And when we condemn someone for something they didn't do, we destroy hope in communities. When I met the McMillian family, the hopelessness was tangible. And this idea that people were also being threatened and convicted and condemned was very real. And you can't live in a space like that without wanting people to understand what that legacy feels like. And so, yeah, it was really important to me that we let the humanity of people who are in these situations come forward. We've now got to the point in this country where we've now had 160 people on death row be proved innocent and released. 160 people have been exonerated. We've executed about 1,500 people. That means that for every 9 people we've executed, we've identified one innocent person on death row. And you think about that rate of error. And if somebody said, 1 out of 9 apples will kill you if you touch it in a grocery store, nobody would sell apples. If for every 9 planes that went up, 1 would crash and everybody died, you wouldn't be allowed to fly. But we tolerate this rate of error in the death penalty context because we don't understand the humans, the people, the families that are being caught up in that. And so we wanted that humanity to be presented, and we were grateful, I was grateful for Jamie's amazing performance because it gives dynamism to his life. But we also have other people on the row, and it was important to me that you also meet people like Herbert Richardson, my client, who was actually a Vietnam vet who did something and killed someone, but whose humanity comes through. And I want people to feel the anguish and the wrongfulness of executing him despite his relative level of guilt. And all of that humanity becomes important. But your emphasis on the spirituality is really important because when you're in these situations, when you are condemned to die on death row, you will not survive unless you're willing to believe things you haven't seen, unless you have this hope, this aspiration. These families can't find the will to stay with their loved one without this willingness to believe things they haven't seen, because they haven't seen people go to prison and get back out when they've been condemned. And so holding on to that hope and lifting up that hope, which can be sustained by faith or by community or by fellowship, is really key. I've always believed that hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Injustice prevails where hopelessness persists. We've got to find ways to keep communities hopeful about what we can do to create balance and fairness, integrity, and justice in spaces where we haven't seen as much as we need.
See this brother here, man?
Yeah, that's poignant. Poignant.
Can I just...
And sister,
by the way,
I want to ask you something. Okay.
Mike and I had like an agreement that we were just going to toss to Brian whenever we were like, we don't know. Brian. You know why now. But I just wanted to say, just in terms of, just a follow-up to what you just said, in terms of making this movie and in the post-process, we screen a lot. We screen a lot in front of audiences, test audiences, we get feedback. We're in we do a lot of kind of editorial manipulation based on just how does the audience feel, which we don't know until we really show it. And two of the most consistent responses out of all the audiences we showed the movie to was, which to me told me that we had something really special, was the reaction to Herbert's character, and how many people at the end said how much they felt for Herbert, even though they knew he was guilty. And then also that this was such a emotional, moving film, but there was so much hope. Like, they were surprised that there was so much hope to the story, because they were expecting it to be such a dark story, and it's actually, it's not, right? It's very life-affirming, actually. And so it's that, what you're saying is definitely consistent with what the audience is feeling, so yay.
And that's an excellent point, and that resiliency of spirit, because it's not heavily religious, but it's profoundly spiritual, because spirituality makes religion behave right? Exactly. So the beauty of that infinite connection, person to person, and you feel that, and by the way, I thought it was so brilliant and honest to show a guy who knows he did wrong, who says he did wrong, and to feel the fellow feeling with his other prisoners who encourage him. You know, victim of PTSD, you'll see it in the film, and the exquisite performance there of the
Robert
brother
Morgan.
who played him, right? But let me ask you too, one of the things that will inevitably come up is, you know, who the director is, right? It's not an African American, right? An Asian brother, but remarkable and powerful. Tell us why. Because he has his own experiences, right? Out of his own family that has the kind of universal cast of what it means to face imprisonment and what it means to face that kind of trauma. Talk a bit about that.
Sure. Destin is an incredible human. He, you know, the script came into us, screenplay form. He had written it. He was attached to direct. The script was amazingly emotional. He directed Short Term 12. He directed The Glass Castle. So his body of work thus far, emotional and human, is like the two words that come to my mind when I think about both of those movies, right? And so for me, the important thing about this film was to get beyond the politics of it and get right to the core of just basic human emotion, and just basic human relatability. And we all felt like Destin could tap into that so well, and he did. And he just has this amazing sensitivity, and he comes from a history of internment, and you know, he has his own history of marginalization, oppression in terms of his family, of course,
And I think it's important, there's a group of directors, young directors, people of color, who spend time with one another, that have not only experienced marginalization as a person of color, but they've also experienced marginalization in this space, which doesn't always prefer color, that has always demanded things of people of color that they wouldn't demand of other people. And that community, these young directors have spent time building and supporting one another. And Destin was a part of that community with Ryan Coogler. And Ryan was the person who said to me, you know, he is gifted and talented, he'd be perfect. And that affirmation was really, really important to me in working with Destin, and you see it come through. What it feels like to kind of live in the shadows, but to kind of tell these stories. I was really honored that he's part of this.
No, it's beautiful.
I had a similar experience.
Right. And but tell us too, you know, people can be blinded by your handsomeness and how charismatic you are, as many people are here today. And I'll just give you, look, I had to sign
You enjoy this.
He's like my son. I got a ribbon. But I had to sign an NDA, but I'll say one thing. I'm going to give y'all a big secret. Strip search scene. That's all I need to tell you. That's all I need to say to you, all right? Yeah. Be there that first weekend. Check that out. I'm trying to hook y'all up. I'm trying to get y'all to hook up. Part 2. But seriously, you know, you're an artist, right? And as an artist, you're trying to tell a story, many stories. You want to inhabit as many characters as possible. And you know that telling the story of black people, period, is complicated at best. But to tell a story of black people who are caught in harm's way, who have in part perpetuated it, and who have in part been victims of that, why is it so important cinematically to narrate the complexity of black identity. We ain't just one thing. We have a right to be a bunch of things at the same time.
I think it's reality. You know, it's an experience that we had to live. You know, from being young, we're taught to code switch, to blend in, to dumb down our glow. You know, to not make anybody else feel intimidated. You know, that's kind of like what we've been taught since we were young. Right. So to have an honest portrayal of that on screen, I think is really, really important. To show the layers, to show the thought process, to show the things that everybody don't get a chance to see. Right. That fly on the wall perspective, I think, is really important. I think true judge of character is what you do when nobody's looking. And that's what cinema gets you. It gives you a chance at seeing. So to be able to kind of take these characters and give layers to them, not just the propaganda that you see on media outlets and what you see on the news and with the narrative that people try to force on us, but now let's give it from our perspective. Let's give an honest portrayal of who we are, and that's that's something that I want to be a part of.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And speaking of that, and speaking of, that's right, give them love right there, right? Speaking of Miles and Coltrane, let's see the first time that Bryan Stevenson meets Johnny D, and the skepticism. What I loved about it, right? It ain't like, oh yeah, thank you. No.
I'm gonna work for this one.
Yeah, right. So let's roll tape on the second clip we have here.